You're listening to a presentation from Calvary Chapel St. Petersburg. For more audio and video content or other information about our church, visit calvarystp.org.
Well, we are almost finished with the book of Proverbs, and so Pastor Mike's going to be doing next week, which is Proverbs 31. It's going to be a good chapter, right? His wife's going to sit on the front row, take it all in. If you know, you know, Proverbs 31. But I have Proverbs 30. And so it's kind of the lead up to that. And so one of the things that I noticed about Proverbs 30, it has a different voice to it. I don't know if you've read a book and all of a sudden you're reading it and all of a sudden it's like something happens where the author changes and there's a dramatic shift. Not that that's too dramatic in Proverbs 30, but what it's coming from a different voice. And it's from this author that it's called the Sayings of Agar. Not really sure. No one really knows much about him. And when you hear it, it's saying the same things that the book of Proverbs saying, but it's saying it from a different perspective. And so one of the things that I was reading it and over, it's it's saying the same thing, but from a different vantage point. And I think sometimes that's actually really healthy to hear, right? Maybe your spouse is telling you one thing over and over and over again, and then somebody else says it, and you're like, oh, I agree with that 100%. And you're like, that's what I've been saying the whole time. I think that's what Proverbs is doing tonight. That was a hypothetical thing that happened, maybe, possibly. So we are, Proverbs 30. It's saying the same thing, but it says it a little differently. It's these sayings of Agar. It's really bold in my Bible. It's the biggest thing that's in there. So here we go. Proverbs chapter 30, you'll read it. Oh, we're going to read it together. Here we go. The sayings of Agar, son of Jakku, an inspired utterance. This man's utterance to Ithel. I am weary, God, but I can prevail. Surely I am a brute, not a man. I do not have human understanding. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained to the knowledge of the Holy One. Who has gone up to heaven and come down? Whose hand have gathered up the wind? Who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is the name of his son? Surely you know. Every word of God is flawless. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, or he'll rebuke you and prove you a liar. Two things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me my only daily bread. Otherwise, I might have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. Do not slander a servant to their master, or they will curse you, and you will pay for it. There are those who curse their fathers and do not bless their mothers, those who are pure in their own eyes and yet are not cleansed of their filth, those whose eyes are ever so haughty, whose glances are so disdainful, those whose teeth are swords and whose jaws are set with knives, to devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among mankind. The leech has two sisters. Give, give, they cry. There are three things that are never satisfied, four that never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, land, which is never satisfied with water, and fire, which never says enough. The eye that mocks a father, that scorns an aged mother, will be pecked out by the ravens of the valley, will be eaten by the vultures. There are three things that are too amazing for me, four that I don't understand. The way of the eagle in the sky, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship on high seas, and the way of a man with a young woman. This is why an adulterous woman, she eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. Under three things the earth trembles. Under four it cannot bear up. A servant who becomes king, a godless fool who gets plenty to eat, a contemptible woman who gets married, and a servant who displaces her mistress. Four things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. Ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food in the summer. Hyraxes are creatures of little power, yet they make their homes in the crags. Locusts have no king, yet they advance together in ranks. A lizard can be caught with the hand, yet it is found in the king's palaces. There are three things that are stately in their stride, four that move with stately bearing. A lion, mighty among beasts, who retreats before nothing. A strutting rooster, a he-goat, and a king secure against revolt. If you play the fool and exalt yourself, or if you plan evil, clap your hand over your mouth. For a churning cream produces butter. And as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. So Lord, as we look at your word this evening, I pray you would speak to our hearts, Lord, that this wisdom, the wisdom about who you are, will become true, Lord, for us, that we would see it bearing out in our lives, that it would produce much fruit. And Lord, that we would not be the fool, but the wise one. So help us. In your name we pray. Amen. See, I told you, it's very different than the rest of Proverbs. As we're going through it, I read it, I was like over and over, and I'm like, I am just trying to get inside of, okay, this is totally a different perspective, but I think it's also really helpful to hear it in a different way. So a couple of points this evening is this: who is God? Right? He's going to ask this question right at the beginning of it. He's going to be talking about how to know God. The second thing that I notice in here is in our eyes. He makes a lot of observations about how we process wisdom instead of learning from wisdom. And the third point is this: observing God's wisdom. I mean, if you notice at the end, he mentions all these creatures. He's like, just look around. And when you look around, what will you see? The ants storing food. Where does he get that idea from? And I think what he's trying to do is help us to make observations in learning God's wisdom, which is very clearly in our world. All right, but the first point, though, who is God? If you notice in verse 3, I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained to the knowledge of the Holy One. At first, as I was reading the first couple of verses, I'm trying to understand, what is he really getting at here? What's the point? And I think he's trying to talk about how there's wisdom, and it's so great. And that wisdom is so great in comparison to his own wisdom. And so he's asking this kind of rhetorical question. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained to the knowledge of the Holy One. Who has gone up to heaven? Who has wrapped the waters? These are trying to personify the greatness, the largeness of who God is. And I think he's saying, when I think about my own wisdom in comparison to God's, who is like him? And he's drawing this comparison to that. Now, many years ago, one of the things that you know is when you do something by yourself, you think you're really good at it, right? Until what? You're met with the competition of other people. So I was at a really small Christian elementary school. It doesn't exist anymore. All my schools don't exist anymore. That's so weird. My middle school got torn down too, and that was a public school. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe it's me. Okay. So, and I remember one of the things that they want you to do is called field day. And in your own mind, on field day, you think you're the best at some of these things. And so the coach is going around picking who's going to represent the school. Now, I don't know what the competition is. I'm at a really small school, and I'm only competing against kids that I know in my own class. And I'm not the fastest in any of them. And so I remember I got picked to run like some type of lap around some type of field. It might as well have been for an eternity. And so I got picked to do it. And so I remember there's 2 heats, and the faster kids were supposed to go first, and the slower kids were to go second. And I was in the slower group. And I was like, how hard could this be? I think I could keep up. I could beat my brother at a race, possibly. Now, he's younger than me, so you could win. So the only thing I have to compare about my speed is myself and my small little world until you go to a track meet. And I remember when that thing went off, I remember everybody's, they're off. And I'm like, I'm never going to catch any of them. And I remember running as hard as I could and looking over at the principal, just shaking her head like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're in last place. And I realized that day is in your own head, you might think that you're somewhat fast or good at something until what? You come up against the wisdom or the strength of somebody else and you realize, I'm not that good. And that day taught me a valuable lesson. I never admit to anything. It's one of the keys when you meet a musician, you never admit that you play an instrument. They're like, oh yeah, I play guitar. I'm like, yeah, I kind of play around a little bit. Because what you don't want to do is go and play with somebody and they just crush you. You're like, yeah, I don't want to play anymore. I just hate playing. Why do I even bother doing it? So there's this sense, I think what he's getting at in the story here is he's comparing. He says, as I think about my wisdom, it's nothing in comparison. It's nothing in comparison to who God is. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained the knowledge of the Holy One. It's far from me ever knowing. And I think this is part of the first sign, not only to humility, but to really understanding God's wisdom, is to realize that in my own capacity, I don't have it all together. And so I can actually see a difference between what God is saying and how things work out in my own head. And when you know that there's a gap between all that, that's actually a good thing. It means you're on the right track. I like what it says in the devotional book that I've been reading through with Proverbs. It says this: he says he doesn't know God, but that very statement is a mark of spiritual awakening. Those who are confident they know God well don't. Those who cry that they don't know him at all begun to do so. Sometimes a keen sense of God's absence is a sign that he's actually drawing us closer to him. The man who cried, "I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief," was actually putting faith in Jesus. The first step to remedying ignorance is to know the full extent of your ignorance. And I think that's so helpful. So I learned that day that I'm not fast, and I don't try to pretend to be. When somebody says, "Are you going to race?" Nope, I know better. I know my limitations. And just physics too, by the way. My legs are pretty short. I can't compete with somebody's legs that are longer. That's the excuse I'm going to go with. So the first point is this. I think there's a recognition that whoever this wise person who's saying these wise things, Agur, A-G-U-R, there's nothing in the Bible about him. We don't really know, but we know his sayings had left some mark, and by inspiration of God's Spirit, it's in here. The only other thing here that it was recognized, it says this: an inspired utterance, which is a key way of saying it was recognized as being something wisdom from God. And the first sign to true wisdom is recognizing that God's wisdom is so far beyond ours. And because of that, the absurdity to think that I'm on his same level, it becomes very, very clear right away. Also, one of the things that I noticed too about this at the very beginning, not only is God's wisdom above ours, but God's wisdom is not, and like we've talked about through the whole book, is not just this impersonal force that floats around. This is God's wisdom. It's his. And knowing God, you can know his wisdom. And that's why I think he says here in verse 4, who has gone up to heaven and come down? Whose hands have gathered up the wind? He's talking about that God's not separate from his creation, where in the sense that, it just kind of is there and he's kind of there. No, this creation that's there, this God that exists, this is all by him. He's the one that began it all out of his wisdom. And his wisdom is this, as he describes in Proverbs 8, it's like this person. And his wisdom is crying out. It's wisdom that formed the world. I think there's this sense here that not only does he recognize that his wisdom is different than God's, but that God's wisdom is what actually gives everything in creation its being. It holds it all together, as it says he holds everything together in Colossians. So there's this sense here that he is right away recognizing this difference. And as a wise person realizes that his wisdom is not as wise as God, and that is definitely something that's comforting to know. The other thing that I noticed about what he says, he does a lot of couplets. He goes, 3 things I recognize, but there's a 4th. He does this quite a bit throughout here. And what he notices, I think, is this second point, is that what he noticed in the world is that people are doing things in our eyes. What he notices is that people take God's wisdom and they try to improve on it, right? It's not a good idea. It's taking God's wisdom and people treat it like a recipe. Just a little pinch of this, a little pinch of that. I'm gonna throw a little pizzazz in there. I'm gonna, Emerald Lagasse, or I'm gonna bam it up. I'm gonna step it up a couple notches. Well, God's wisdom doesn't need that help. It doesn't need to be elevated. And what he says is, what he notices, that people take God's wisdom and they want to change it. Look what it says in verse 6. Do not add to his words, or he will rebuke you and prove you a liar. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, why would somebody want to add to his words? What's the logical conclusion from that? They don't like what he said. The best thing to do, right, is the same thing that the enemy, the snake, the serpent, told Eve. Did God really say that? Is that what he really, really meant? Because I don't think he did. Are you tracking with me, Eve? I think we're on the same page here. God's kind of out to lunch. I don't think that's what he really means. What he really means is something this. He changes the context of what God had told him. No, God did say that. And so what happens with our own wisdom, we hear God's wisdom. We're like, okay, God, that makes a lot of sense, but I think I could do it better than you. Let me add a little bit of my own pizzazz to it. When you add too much pizzazz to food, what happens? It tastes terrible. he's like, hey, it's perfect the way it is. Don't need to add anything to it. But God, I don't like that. I don't like your flavors. I like my own flavors. I want to do it my way. And that's where he's warning him here. Listen, the tendency for us, instead of listening to God's wisdom that holds everything together, which says why we exist and what we exist for, and just start changing it, you're going to have a problem. He goes, another thing that I think is obvious in here, what happens, he says, what you do with God's wisdom, instead of adding words to it, what you do is you adjust the lens of it. Have you ever, at the conference not too long ago, somebody was here and they had their glasses on the table, and so I was trying to put their glasses on, and I put it on, I about instantly fell over. I about had a headache. I was like, you are blind as a bat. Like, how do you even see out of these things? And I give it back to the person, and they were like, what, these are just slight corrections in my eyes. I'm like, slight corrections? I don't know what you're talking about, but I almost fell over. I can't see a thing out of these things. But imagine, if you will, that's what we do with God's wisdom. We adjust the lens of it. And so we're like, you know what, God, your wisdom looks pretty blurry to me, but I know what'll sharpen it up. I will change it to reach my own objectives and goals. Not only am I going to change what you're saying because I don't like it and I'd rather do it a different way, I'm actually going to have it focus on other things, which is myself. Look at what he says here in verse 11. There are those who curse their fathers and do not bless their mothers. Those who are pure, what? Look at what it says here. In their own eyes, and yet are not cleansed of their filth. They have focused, ratcheted so hard on their lenses that they can't even see themselves. There's another thing, years ago, you might not know this about me, but for college, one of the ways that I paid for my college was every weekend I would do weddings. I worked for a guy, Al Alvarez. He was an event videographer. And I remember the very first time I was working at, it's a long story, but he hired me. And every weekend I would go out and do weddings. I've been all over the place doing weddings. The Vinoy, the Don Cesar, did a ton over there. Fort Harrison Hotel, where Scientology's at. Been all these venues, did all these weddings. And I remember one time, and I was a videographer. Now this is super VHS days, and like a little tiny black and white screen. You had to put the load in the cassette, put it in. Totally different nowadays. So much different. I mean, I had a little black and white screen, and I had a camera on my shoulder, I had a belt pack. And I remember one day, Al's like, hey, here's what's gonna happen. I need you to take photography. Problem, I've never taken photography in my life. I don't know what all the buttons do. I know you click the button to take the picture. And he's like, but here's the thing. The wedding's getting ready to start. He hands me a digital camera. This is the Fuji S1, which is a great camera, by the way. They're 6 megapixels, I think it was at the time. He's like, here's the digital camera. Here's the lens on it. Don't know anything about f-stop. Don't know anything about ISO. Don't know anything about shutter speed. And I need you on the stage while you're videotaping the bride. I need you to take all these photos because I sold this package and you're gonna be part of it. And we're gonna take all your photos that you took and we're gonna put them on a laptop and we're gonna display them so people can actually purchase them later. This is a terrible idea to tell me 30 minutes. I've never shot photography. I don't even know what I'm doing. And I remember, okay, first of all, being freaked out that I totally screwed up this lady's wedding, right? I'm doing the video. So he gives me the camera. While I'm videotaping, I'm taking photos of this bride and the groom, like from the perspective I'm at in the front. All I could say to myself was, I sure hope this worked. And here's the thing. All my photos are gonna be on display at the reception for everybody at this place to see how bad of a photographer I am. And sure enough, when I loaded that SD card into that computer, I put them all in, and I organized it, the first shot was blurry. I was like, oh, this is so not good. It's so blurry. Maybe they'll think it's a creative effect, because that's the only thing I can go with. See, what I noticed is that in photography, sometimes you can get like longer zoom lenses, and then you can get like very particular shots that are not in your view. You can use these long lenses to capture these really small moments. But what I know about photography, and I know about it, is that depending on the angle of the lens, you're capturing things in your perspective, whether very far away, so like a 600 millimeter lens is capturing something very far away, or like a 17 millimeter is something very wide. I think that's what happens when we define wisdom in our own terms, or when we adjust the lenses on ourselves. We think, I think I'm doing pretty good. Not only that, I think I'm a pretty good guy. And the proverb says here, verse 11, there are those who curse their fathers and do not bless their mothers, those who are pure in their own eyes, and yet they are not cleansed of their filth. Those whose eyes are so haughty, whose glances are so disdainful, those whose teeth are swords and whose jaws are set with knives, to devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among mankind. He says you've lost any type of perspective, and the only thing you're focusing on, somehow magically, is yourself. You don't think you have any problems. You think that everything else is to blame except for you. Have you ever had that? Have you ever been in a situation where you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I would never do something like that. And what you're describing, this problem that you're talking about, the only person to blame is you. I would never do something like this. And on top of it, more importantly, I'm not at fault. There's this tendency that I think that the Proverbs is warning us. If God is true and his wisdom does exist, we have to believe that he really exists. And this is his wisdom that put all this together. His wisdom is why I'm here. Secondly, what am I focused on? My wisdom or his? Because I can look at the world just from my perspective and say, well, God, if you would just get your stuff together and these people get their stuff together, from my perspective, it would all work out. What the Proverbs is saying, sayings of a Gur, or whatever his name is, or where he's from, he's saying, I think you're missing it. You're missing this wisdom that's from above, that changes us. And so another observation here from the devotional I thought was really helpful. And he talks about how these series of verses from 11 to 14 deal with this idea of pride. He goes, first, if you notice, pride, this shifting of the lens, makes us hate authority. I thought, if you look at verse 11, we read it a couple times, but why does this person disdain his parents when the commandment is to honor your father and mother? He says, these are the people who curse their father and mother. What's happening? Well, they have a problem with authority. And one of the things that you notice that people that choose, maybe they don't recognize God's position in his place, what they do is they try to remove any type of authority to put themselves in that place. He goes, next, pride, what it does, it blinds us to our flaws. We can't see ourselves. We can't see the problem or the filth that we have on ourselves. The third thing that happens, I thought it was helpful. He said, it also makes us haughty and disdainful towards others. And the last thing, it finally moves us to be ruthless and unjust to those with less social power than us, devouring the poor. Pride is an all-around evil, he says. So, what he's getting at in this proverb, do you know God's space? Do you know his wisdom is above yours? Because that's a really healthy place to be. Second, are you only focused in on yourself? Do you only see yourself as having this position? Do you not see that how in some way you can make everything about you and serving your own purposes? And he's warning those people to do that. You look pure in your own eyes, but you're really covered in filth. He continues to talk about this in a metaphor way, and it's kind of like gross, but verse 15, the leech has two daughters, give and give, they cry. He's trying to illustrate what happens is when your lens is totally messed up and everything else is blurry and you're the only one that sees everything straight, he goes, you can deceive yourselves in such a way that you become like a leech. You only focus on yourself. You're only interested in getting something for yourself. That's why he has two daughters, give and give, which is, that's an interesting thing. I've never been bit by a leech and got my blood sucked, but I don't want to, but it doesn't look fun. The only illustration I can think of was like Rambo, but that's a whole other thing. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay. So I think one of the things he's getting at in this proverb is, who is God? What's his wisdom like? 2, what are you focusing on? Or what are we focusing on in our own eyes? And the last thing that I thought was helpful in this proverb is observe